Anxiety is often viewed as a disorder, something that needs to be fixed or eliminated, but in truth, it is one of the most fundamental and adaptive features of the human brain. It exists not as a flaw, but as a signal, an ancient survival mechanism that evolved to protect you. Millions of years ago, before the modern world, humans relied on this same neural circuitry to detect danger and respond swiftly. The same pattern that now triggers unease before a social event or presentation once helped your ancestors avoid predators, find shelter, and survive in uncertain environments. The machinery of anxiety has not changed, only the nature of the threats has. What used to be the rustle of leaves in the dark is now an email notification, a conversation you are avoiding, or the uncertainty of the future. The nervous system does not distinguish between physical and psychological threat. The same biological process is activated, the same hormones are released, and the same state of hyperalertness emerges. When anxiety arises, the brain and body enter a state of heightened readiness. The amygdala, a deep brain structure involved in detecting threat, becomes active and signals the hypothalamus to initiate the stress response. Adrenaline and cortisol flood the bloodstream, heart rate increases, pupils dilate, and the entire body prepares for action. This system is called the sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system, the part that mobilizes energy and focus. In the short term, this is incredibly useful. It allows you to respond quickly and efficiently when something demands attention. But problems begin when the system doesn't shut off. Chronic stress or unprocessed emotions can keep the body locked in this state of activation, and when that happens, the same mechanism that once ensured survival begins to work against you. The mind becomes restless, sleep suffers, digestion slows, and focus fragments. The alarm is still ringing even when there is no fire. Understanding that anxiety is a feature, not a flaw, allows you to step back from it. You start to recognize that anxiety is your nervous system's way of saying something needs attention. It is not a signal to panic. It is a signal to prepare. The goal, therefore, is not to eliminate anxiety, but to regulate it, to move smoothly between states of activation and calm. The body and mind operate like a dynamic seesaw between two main systems, the sympathetic, which activates, and the parasympathetic, which restores. Both are essential. You cannot live in one without the other. When you need to perform, you lean into alertness. When it's time to rest, you engage calm. Anxiety becomes damaging only when you lose the ability to return to baseline. The art is in learning how to transition between these two states at will. The most direct way to do that is through the body. People often try to manage anxiety through thinking, trying to reason their way out of it. But that's like trying to convince a fire alarm to stop ringing with logic. The alarm is physiological, not cognitive. You must use tools that work at the level of the body to influence the mind. Breathing is one of the fastest and most effective. When you take a double inhale through the nose, followed by a long exhale through the mouth, you perform what scientists call a physiological sigh. This offloads carbon dioxide, slows the heart, and tells the brain that the body is safe. In seconds, the nervous system begins to calm. Visual control is another powerful lever. When you are anxious, your eyes tend to focus narrowly, scanning for threats. If you deliberately expand your gaze, taking in the whole visual field, you activate neural circuits associated with safety and quieting. These simple shifts in physiology are messages to the brain that you are not in danger. Another key element is interpretation. Anxiety and excitement are almost identical states in the body: elevated heart rate, rapid breathing, heightened focus. The difference lies in how the brain labels them. By reframing anxiety as readiness, you transform it from something paralyzing to something energizing. Athletes, soldiers, and performers all use this reframing to perform under pressure. The goal is not to eliminate anxiety, but to work with it, to use that heightened energy as fuel for focus, courage, and performance. This is what scientists call optimal arousal, the zone where alertness is high but not overwhelming. When you understand how anxiety operates, you gain agency over it instead of being controlled by it. Your biology is not your enemy. The circuits that create anxiety are the same ones that allow for motivation, attention, and drive. The same adrenaline that makes your hands shake can sharpen your mind when directed properly. The nervous system is not malfunctioning. It is miscalibrated. The tools to recalibrate are built into your body, breathing, movement, vision, and deliberate recovery. Anxiety will always be part of the human experience, but when you understand it through the lens of neuroscience, it becomes less of a storm and more of a compass, an internal signal pointing toward growth, preparation, and readiness for what matters most. The human mind and body are not separate systems. They are two sides of the same coin, deeply interconnected through networks of nerves, hormones, and chemical signals that constantly communicate with one another. When it comes to anxiety, most people make the mistake of assuming that it begins in the mind, that it's purely a psychological phenomenon caused by worrying thoughts or fears. But neuroscience reveals that anxiety is often driven by signals coming from the body to the brain, not the other way around. The heart, lungs, and gut all have sensory receptors that send real-time information to the brain about how safe or unsafe the environment feels. This two-way highway between the body and brain is what determines your internal state at any given moment. When your heart beats fast, your breathing becomes shallow, or your muscles tighten, your brain doesn't just observe these sensations, it interprets them. It concludes that something might be wrong and prepares you for action, often creating the feeling we label as anxiety. The brain is constantly reading and interpreting data from the body. Every heartbeat, every breath, every change in muscle tension provides feedback that helps your brain assess threat levels. This means that your thoughts and emotions are not isolated. They are reflections of your physiological state. When your body is calm, your brain receives signals of safety, and your thoughts tend to follow that pattern. When your body is tense, your brain interprets it as a sign of danger. This is why you can feel anxious even when nothing is objectively wrong. Your body might be sending distress signals that your mind is trying to make sense of. In moments like this, trying to talk yourself out of anxiety rarely works because your mind is responding to what it perceives as real physical evidence of threat. The fastest and most effective way to shift your mental state is therefore to start with the body. This is where the science of physiological regulation becomes so important. By consciously altering your breathing, your posture, or your visual focus, you can change the messages your body sends to the brain. Controlled breathing, for example, directly affects the vagus nerve, a major communication channel between the body and the brain. When you slow your breathing, and especially when you lengthen your exhale, you activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which counteracts the stress response. This slows your heart rate and sends a signal to the brain that you are safe. The brain then downregulates the production of stress-related neurochemicals like adrenaline and cortisol. Within minutes, your thoughts begin to quiet and your perception of threat diminishes. The shift is not imagined. It's physiological. Another body-based tool that influences the brain is vision. Your visual system is tightly linked to your state of arousal. When you are anxious or afraid, your eyes naturally move into a narrow, focused mode known as tunnel vision. This enhances attention to threats, but also traps you in the anxious state. By deliberately broadening your gaze, softening your focus, and taking in the wider environment, you activate brain circuits that are associated with relaxation and safety. This is not a metaphor. Studies show that panoramic vision reduces activity in the amygdala, the brain's fear center, and increases parasympathetic tone. In other words, by changing how you look at the world, you change how your brain interprets it. This connection also explains why posture and movement are powerful regulators of anxiety. When you are hunched, tense, or immobile, your body is mimicking the state of fear. Your brain reads that posture as evidence of threat. But when you stand tall, open your chest, or take deliberate steps forward, your nervous system registers those actions as signals of control and agency. Forward movement, especially walking or running, activates neural pathways in the brainstem that reduce rumination and anxiety. It shifts your attention from internal worries to external goals. This is one reason physical activity is so effective for regulating mood. It tells your brain through action that you are not frozen or helpless. When you understand this two-way communication, anxiety becomes less mysterious. You begin to see that your mental state is not solely dictated by your thoughts, but by the constant feedback loop between your body and brain. This means you are not powerless against anxiety. You have direct access to the control panels of your nervous system through breath, vision, movement, and posture. Instead of trying to control every anxious thought, you can focus on controlling your physiological state, and your thoughts will follow naturally. The body and brain are always in conversation, and the way you breathe, move, and see determines the tone of that conversation. When the body signals calm, the mind quiets. When the body signals chaos, the mind scrambles to interpret it. Mastering this relationship gives you the ability to influence your internal world in real time, transforming anxiety from an uncontrollable mental storm into a manageable state that you can guide with intention and science-backed tools. Among all the tools that neuroscience has uncovered for regulating stress and anxiety, one stands out for its simplicity, immediacy, and biological precision: the physiological sigh. It is something the body already does unconsciously, often when we cry, before we fall asleep, or after a moment of relief. The physiological sigh is a pattern of breathing that involves taking 2 quick inhales through the nose, followed by 1 long, extended exhale through the mouth. This simple sequence has a profound effect on the nervous system because it directly recalibrates the balance between carbon dioxide and oxygen in the blood, quiets the body's stress response, and signals safety to the brain. What makes this tool so powerful is that it does not rely on belief, mindset, or effortful meditation. It is pure biology, a way to use the body to control the state of the mind in real time. To understand why this works, it helps to look at what happens inside the body during stress. When you feel anxious or under threat, your breathing automatically changes. It becomes shallow, rapid, and irregular. This pattern traps carbon dioxide in the body, which in turn increases acidity in the blood and heightens feelings of panic or discomfort. At the same time, the sympathetic nervous system is activated, increasing heart rate and alertness. The physiological sigh works by reversing that pattern. When you take the first deep inhale, you fill your lungs almost completely. The second, shorter inhale brings in just enough air to reopen the millions of tiny air sacs in the lungs called alveoli, which often collapse during shallow breathing. This maximizes oxygen exchange. The long exhale then allows a slow and controlled release of carbon dioxide, which directly lowers heart rate and calms the autonomic nervous system. Within 1 or 2 cycles, you can feel a noticeable drop in tension, both physically and mentally. This mechanism is not psychological. It is physiological. The body is equipped with sensors in the heart and lungs that monitor carbon dioxide levels, oxygen intake, and pressure changes. These sensors send signals through the vagus nerve to the brainstem, which is responsible for controlling breathing, heart rate, and emotional state. When you perform a physiological sigh, these signals tell the brain that the body is safe, and the brain responds by reducing activity in the amygdala, the region associated with fear and anxiety. In essence, the breath communicates safety to the nervous system faster than thought can. That is why this tool is often more effective than trying to calm yourself through reasoning or positive thinking. The breath bypasses the mental chatter and works directly on the circuitry of calm. Another fascinating aspect of the physiological sigh is that it happens naturally in moments of recovery. When animals or humans come out of a stressful state, such as escaping danger or crying, their bodies often produce this pattern of breathing spontaneously. It is the body's built-in mechanism for resetting the internal balance of gases and nervous system tone. Researchers have recorded this breathing pattern in sleeping infants, stressed mice, and people emerging from strong emotional experiences. What modern neuroscience has done is to identify this natural reflex and turn it into a deliberate tool, a way to consciously trigger the body's recovery process whenever needed. The effects are almost immediate. When you perform 1 or 2 physiological sighs, you stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system, the branch responsible for rest, digestion, and recovery. Heart rate slows, blood pressure stabilizes, and cortical activity in the brain shifts from high alert to balance. Over time, practicing this breathing pattern also trains the nervous system to be more resilient. Just as physical exercise strengthens muscles, repeated practice of controlled breathing strengthens your ability to regulate emotional and physiological stress. People who use it regularly find they can recover from stress faster and maintain a calmer baseline even in challenging situations. What makes this tool particularly valuable is its accessibility. It requires no equipment, no environment, and no long practice session. It can be done in the middle of a meeting, in a crowded room, or alone before bed. It is invisible to others and takes less than a minute to reset the nervous system. In situations where anxiety spikes suddenly, before public speaking, during conflict, or after receiving bad news, this simple breathing technique gives you a direct way to regain control. You are using your biology in the way it was designed to work, taking advantage of built-in neural pathways that have evolved over millions of years to maintain balance. Modern life exposes the nervous system to constant low-level stress, notifications, noise, uncertainty, social pressures, and most of us rarely give the body a chance to reset. The physiological sigh offers a way to counteract this overload instantly, to reestablish the connection between breath, brain, and body. It reminds us that regulation is not purely mental, it is physical, measurable, and within conscious reach. The breath is both the entry point and the control switch for the mind. With just 2 quick inhales and a long exhale, you can shift your entire state, lowering anxiety and restoring calm, not through willpower, but through direct command of your own biology. The way you see the world does far more than inform you about what is in front of you. Vision is one of the most powerful levers for changing how your brain and body feel. Because it is directly connected to the systems that regulate alertness and calm. When you feel anxious or under pressure, your visual field naturally narrows. Your eyes dart from point to point, scanning for potential threats. This tunnel vision is part of your nervous system survival mechanism. It helps you focus on a specific danger and react quickly. But in modern life, when the perceived threat is psychological rather than physical, this same narrowing of vision can trap you in a loop of anxiety. The brain keeps interpreting the constricted visual field as evidence of ongoing danger, which further activates the stress response. What few people realize is that the reverse is also true. By deliberately changing how you use your eyes, you can send powerful signals to the brain to adjust your internal state. The visual system is not just a sense, it is a direct extension of the brain. Nearly 1/3 of the human brain is devoted to processing visual information, and the networks that control vision overlap with those that regulate your level of alertness. The relationship is bidirectional. When you are calm, your pupils dilate slightly, your eyes move more slowly, and your visual field broadens to take in the environment. When you are anxious, the pupils constrict, the eyes fixate, and your field of view tightens. The brain interprets these patterns as cues about whether it should activate the sympathetic nervous system, which drives alertness, or the parasympathetic system, which promotes calm. This means you can deliberately manipulate your visual system to influence your emotional state. By broadening your gaze and engaging panoramic vision, where you soften your focus and take in the entire scene rather than fixating on one point, you activate neural circuits in the brainstem and midbrain that signal relaxation and safety. This shift in vision triggers changes in body chemistry as well. When you move from a narrow threat-based focus to a broad panoramic view, activity in the amygdala, the brain's fear center, begins to decrease. At the same time, levels of stress hormones like cortisol and norepinephrine start to normalize. The result is a measurable calming of the nervous system. You can test this effect almost instantly. The next time you feel anxious or overwhelmed, lift your gaze slightly toward the horizon or simply look around without focusing on any one object. Let your peripheral vision expand to include the edges of the room or the sky if you are outdoors. Within seconds, your breathing begins to slow and your body feels more grounded. This is not imagination, it is the biology of safety perception. Your brain evolved to interpret wide visual fields as indicators of secure environments because in nature, predators and dangers were most often detected through peripheral motion. When your visual system is open, the brain reads it as no immediate threat and downregulates the stress response. Visual control also affects movement and posture, which further influence your state. When people are anxious, their eyes tend to move down or fixate narrowly in front of them, which often accompanies slumped posture or a defensive stance. When you raise your gaze and align your posture upright, you naturally shift your nervous system toward alert calmness, a state that balances focus with relaxation. The eyes are therefore not passive receivers of information, but active participants in regulating your body's readiness and composure. Military personnel, first responders, and athletes often use visual control to maintain composure under stress. They train to expand their field of vision and resist tunnel vision in high-pressure situations, allowing their brains to stay calm and responsive rather than reactive. The visual system is also tied to circadian rhythms, which influence mood and anxiety across the day. Early in the morning, exposure to natural light entering the eyes helps set the brain's internal clock and regulates the release of cortisol in healthy pulses. This helps maintain balanced alertness throughout the day and supports better sleep at night. Poor light exposure, on the other hand, especially bright artificial light at night, can dysregulate the system and increase anxiety. This shows how deeply intertwined vision and emotional regulation truly are. Your eyes are the entry point for light, but they also serve as the gateway to your state of mind. By learning to consciously use your vision, you gain one of the most direct forms of self-regulation available. You can use it to upshift your alertness when you need to focus, or to downshift when you need calm. When anxiety takes hold, you can pause, lift your gaze, and expand your field of view. This simple act activates the neural pathways associated with safety and relaxation without the need for external tools or lengthy techniques. It reconnects the mind and body in real time. Vision, breath, and posture all work together as a unified system for controlling internal states. When you learn to guide this system, you realize that calm is not something you must wait for. It is something you can create using the same sensory systems that evolution gave you to survive. Anxiety is often misunderstood as a purely negative state, something to suppress or eliminate, but neuroscience reveals a more accurate and empowering truth. Anxiety is energy in motion. It is the brain and body mobilizing resources for action, preparing you to meet challenges, and keeping you alert to change. The problem arises when that energy becomes misdirected, when instead of fueling forward movement, it loops endlessly inside the mind, creating paralysis instead of progress. The key is not to silence anxiety, but to harness it to convert the physiological activation of stress into purposeful action. When you understand the neural mechanics behind anxiety, you gain the ability to steer it rather than be controlled by it. At the biological level, anxiety arises from the activation of the body's stress response, primarily regulated by the sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system. When you sense uncertainty or potential threat, whether physical or psychological, the hypothalamus sends signals to the adrenal glands, releasing adrenaline and cortisol. These chemicals increase heart rate, sharpen attention, and heighten arousal. From an evolutionary standpoint, this system kept our ancestors alive in dangerous environments. It's the same system that prepares you to act before you even consciously process what's happening. The problem today is that most modern threats are not physical. They are mental, emotional, or social. Your brain reacts to an upcoming exam, a financial problem, or a relationship conflict the same way it would to a predator in the wild. But because you can't fight or run from these stressors, that energy has nowhere to go, and it builds up internally, turning into rumination and tension. The challenge then is to teach the body that activation does not equal danger. One of the most effective ways to do this is by engaging in deliberate physiological control through tools like breathing, movement, and visual focus. For instance, extending your exhalation through controlled breathing lowers carbon dioxide levels in the blood and slows heart rate, signaling safety to the brain. Similarly, expanding your visual field through panoramic vision tells the nervous system that the environment is secure. These tools don't just calm the mind, they redirect the body's stress energy into a state of readiness rather than panic. Once you gain control over your physiology, you can then channel that energy toward action, what might be called adaptive anxiety. Adaptive anxiety is what allows you to perform under pressure, prepare for important tasks, and stay motivated. The difference between productive anxiety and destructive anxiety lies in the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for planning, decision-making, and emotional regulation. When you interpret anxiety as a sign of impending failure or catastrophe, the amygdala dominates and your stress system spirals. But when you reframe anxiety as useful energy for performance, the prefrontal cortex stays online, regulating the amygdala's reactivity. This shift in interpretation changes how your body responds at a chemical level. Dopamine and norepinephrine release in balanced amounts, enhancing focus and drive without tipping into panic. You begin to experience anxiety as activation instead of agitation. Turning anxiety into forward action also involves behavioral strategies. One of the most powerful is to create small, immediate steps toward whatever is triggering the anxiety. The human brain is wired to reward movement toward goals. When you take even a small action in the direction of a challenge, the brain releases dopamine, a molecule associated with motivation and confidence. This feedback loop reduces uncertainty and builds momentum. In contrast, avoidance reinforces the perception of threat, keeping anxiety alive. The more you move forward, the more the nervous system learns that activation is not something to fear, but something to use. This principle applies whether the source of anxiety is a social interaction, a work deadline, or a difficult conversation. Movement, both literal and psychological, breaks the feedback loop of fear. Physical exercise is another direct route to transmuting anxiety into strength. Movement triggers the release of endorphins and increases neuroplasticity, the brain's capacity to adapt and rewire. Studies show that consistent physical activity enhances the connectivity between the amygdala and prefrontal cortex, improving emotional regulation over time. It also builds resilience by teaching the nervous system to tolerate elevated heart rate and adrenaline without interpreting them as danger signals. This is why people who exercise regularly often report feeling calmer and more confident even outside of their workouts. They've trained their brain and body to experience activation as energy, not fear. Another critical element in managing anxiety is mindset. The meaning you assign to physiological sensations determines whether you spiral or adapt. When your heart races or your palms sweat, your interpretation, health, I'm panicking versus my body is preparing me, changes the neural outcome. This process, known as cognitive reappraisal, engages the prefrontal cortex to reshape the emotional response. It's not about denying anxiety, but redefining its purpose. Elite performers, soldiers, and athletes use this technique to maintain composure under stress. They view the sensations of anxiety as readiness, not weakness, and their brains respond accordingly. Ultimately, anxiety is a signal of potential, not doom. It is the body saying something important is at stake. When you learn to harness it, anxiety becomes a tool for growth, motivation, and resilience. You begin to see stress as fuel rather than friction. Through conscious breathing, controlled movement, deliberate action, and mindset shifts, you can transform anxiety from a barrier into a bridge, one that connects your physiological activation to purposeful behavior. The brain's plasticity ensures that each time you do this, you strengthen the circuits of control and weaken those of fear, gradually building a nervous system that doesn't avoid activation but thrives on directing it toward progress.